It's funny. Like, you have any questions for me? Oh, let's do it. Let's find out what I'm going to say. Ha 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 ha. Comic book villain laugh. I love it. No, he's one of my favorite guests, and I was so excited to get him early in our new season of 2026, which I know this is really weird. I was just telling Nathan, hey, when I talk about this being season 6 in the next year, and I know we're recording this in October, it's not even Halloween yet. We're already into 2026 season 6 on the Craftsman Online podcast. So for our YouTube live streamer, just play along. We welcome back a defending champion, Nathan St. Pierre.
Terrific.
Welcome back, my brother.
I am happy to be here as always.
You know, here's a cool thing. I showed you this is a picture. This is what I had left out. What I'm holding here is the Empire State Mason magazine. And back in the fall of 2025, which just seems like it was yesterday, wink, wink, our our freshly established Grand Lodge of New York Esoteric Committee had selected hey,
there it is.
Harmony in the Hive as one of the selected reading texts.
And it was a great review. I really was wonderful. Thank you.
You know, and I am trying to track down at least one of the brothers from that committee because they're esoterics. So I think they're up in the clouds hiding so that I can connect you to. But also, I want to get your book previewed on a future Craftsman Online reading room because of that same reason as we talk about leadership. Normally, Nathan is here to talk to us about ritual because he is more learned than the rest of us. And if you've been playing along, you might have had that gem stuck in your head from your last appearance when we talked about the Preston Webb ritual way back then in season number 5. You talked about this thing called the Baltimore Convention of 1843. And you're just like, Brother Michael, we'll have to talk about that in a future episode. So for those of us who haven't spent every waking minute Googling it and Wikipediaing it and looking it up, can you explain what this was and what they were trying to set out in achieving in 1843?
Absolutely. Yes. So the Baltimore Convention was an attempt to save Masonry in the post Morgan Affair world. Okay, so it was an ambitious attempt to standardize Masonic ritual and practice throughout the United States. It took place over the course of about 10 days or so, except for Sunday where they all went to church, you know, and so and they all met in Baltimore, Maryland, and they all got into different committees, and they just had a big old nerdy time hashing out all of the differences and making it so that way everyone would agree on what was going on. So this was a direct response to the Morgan Affair, okay? Because Masonry basically died the first time, or one of the many times Masonry's almost died, right?
Okay.
And so everybody who knew the ritual had either quit the fraternity or died, and so they were left with this. Okay, but what do we? But like, what do we do? What's good work? How do we do that? And what made things even harder was the number of exposés that had been published because of anti-Masonic fervor. So there's so between the death of Thomas Smith Webb and the Baltimore Convention, there's like at least 4 that I personally have exposés that come out, you know, starting with Hardy in 1819. Then you got Jeremy Ladd Cross, the book that's actually published from the Morgan Affair, Illustrations on Masonry, which is making fun of Preston. And then you've got Light on Masonry, which is that's like a 400-page book because that does all the appendant bodies too. So that just gives you everything. And then Allen's Masonic Ritual was 1831. And so all of those are all in this little tiny window post Morgan Affair, pre Baltimore Convention. So there's a lot of Masonic imposters. If you could call it that, there's a lot of making fun of people for your silly little handshake, and if you can call it, and things like that. So part of what's going on is, all right, since everybody knows what they think the ritual is, let's find out what we say the ritual is, so that way we will know who's a pretender.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense. So you've got the decline from the Morgan Affair, you've got the ritual chaos, you've got everybody dying, you've got the security threats that coming from Masons who may not be Masons coming into your lodge and so on and so forth. And so that the idea starts in 1839 in Alabama. Why not?
Of all places.
That
Okay.
Yep, the Grand Lodge of Alabama in 1839, they send out an SOS to like everybody in the American Masonry, and they're like, "Hey, everybody, we need to get together and save this, and we're gonna do that in 1842, and we're gonna go to Washington D.C. So you got 3 years, be there or be square." So
Gotcha.
that's what they do. Okay.
Okay.
So then
All
in
right.
1842, nobody shows up. I'm kidding. No, like a few people show up, but then they go, we don't actually have the authority to do this. So in 1842, those people who showed up, about 10 of them, they go, all right, everybody here, go back and get the official delegate. So what they called for was grand lecturers, which didn't really exist before then. Give me your grand lecturers. We're going to talk to them. And then that was 1843, the
Okay.
Baltimore Convention. Right. So
Let me hit
Yep.
pause on this because I want to quickly unpack a few things. It's like I'm
Oh,
living
there's
in a
lots to
time
unpack.
machine. Yeah.
There's lots.
First of all, you and I have kind of talked about the Morgan affair a little bit. I feel like I'm living in the future because
Well,
it
you're
seemed like
an expert because you just chatted with Dr. Ann. So this is why I've been planning to drop this bomb on you for a while, because I'm like, he is an expert. I don't have to beat around the bush with.
right. Well, and our 5 YouTube streamers are taking advantage of this, but our poor podcast listeners are like, "What are you talking about?" The Dr. Ann Bunch Morgan affair episode, as we celebrate the 200th anniversary of this Masonic cold case, that will be premiering 2 weeks after this conversation that we're having right now. But
oh, neat. Okay, so to be backward, that is a reverse. But so when you hear that, you'll know even more. Terrific.
Yeah, we are like back to the future. So
indeed,
what I'm saying to the listener is like, if you're like Morgan affair, don't worry, more will be explained in about 2 weeks on this podcast, or unless you go to our YouTube channel and watch everything, and then it's all going to be explained and things will get connected. More interesting than that, though, is the idea of a convention, because this is right about the time where kind of the modern party system that we're used to, with nominations from the floor and delegates, and how the president was being selected was shaping and becoming different. And as you pointed out, Masonry does not have, at least in North America, in the United States, does not have a central governing body. So you mentioned a really key thing, and I want to kind of go back to that, where you said, hey, this first version with 10 guys in DC in 1842, you said, or 1840?
Yep, that was right. 1842.
They realized they didn't have, quote unquote, the power. So how did they get the power, and how did you get 50 well, there wasn't 50 jurisdictions at that time.
There weren't 50 jurisdictions.
40 something ish jurisdictions at that time, knowing that you are still sending letters and that's the most modern form of communication. How did they get all these guys together?
Well, so I mean, they sent letters, right? So in 1842, when those 10 people were there, that's 10 out of 23. So that's basically half the Grand Lodges. So it's not an insignificant number. But in 1843, when they went to Baltimore for the second attempt, they had 16 Grand Lodges out of 23, and more and more delegates. So that was why they were like, all right, this one's a success. We'll go through with the business of doing the convention rather than punting it another year.
Okay. And the part that they were coming together to save Masonry, because this was almost 20 years, so a generation after the effects of the Morgan affair. So they're coming together to save Masonry. And the solution was, hey, we need to canonize our ritual around one type of ritual because we have too many different flavors going on.
We literally need to canonize. That's a great word. It was the attempt to canonize Thomas Smith Webb.
Okay, and make that the quote unquote law of the land.
Yes, and a lot of that has to do with you have a later question about who are the personalities involved, and a lot of that's gonna come up. But basically, it's like everything else, right? Thomas Smith Webb died very young, and he died in 1818 or something like that, right? And so that's a year before Jeremy Ladd Cross writes the Masonic chart. That's before John Barney and John Snow and the roving ritualists are going all over doing the spreading the web work, right? So there's also a little bit of a I got to do this for my friend kind of thing going on, like, because it was Webb and he was the and he was so good, and he's not here anymore, and so he can't tell us how it went. So it's up to us to remember how Webb would have done it, right? Like it's a very Masonic, like you can see. I don't poo-poo them. I don't. You know, I don't. It's just it is what you said. It's the we're canonizing uh,
Right. And it's
this
interesting,
guy.
since talking with you or speaking with you more and more, I've begun to have more of an appreciation of the performance of ritual and
Hmm.
the idea that I'm lucky. We live now in the year 2026,
Hmm.
and we have, entertainment in our pocket all the time with our cell phones. Where back in 1843, you had the theater, or you honestly had your Masonic lodge. An opening and closing of lodge was a form of entertainment. It was seeing ritual on display to some extent, as much as degrees were a greater portion. It was almost like going to the theater and watching a play if you saw somebody executing this. How confusing would that be if you were
That's
traveling around and seeing different styles of that play?
Well, I think the play thing comes later. That's very much a that's very much a 19th century thing where we're going to add the costumes, we're going to add the sets, and we're going to actually pretend that we're like
Mm,
doing the thing instead of, you got to remember we used to do this with three candles and a piece of chalk. Like we
right.
used to be able to play pretend. We
Hmm.
it was only 100 years after that that people were like, I can't pretend. What if we really had the thing here? I need to see it.
Well, so
Like,
what they wanted to do was get some unanimity around like the modes of recognition, obviously, but probably
right.
also around all of the lectures and essays that were now
Yes.
becoming part of the degree after it was
It's
conferred.
mostly, yeah, it's the yeah, lectures is going to be the big lectures, charges, prayers, ceremonies such as consecration, funeral. So basically, so at this convention, they all split themselves into committees. So there's one committee that does uh, work and lectures. There's a different committee for funerals. There's a
Mm,
different committee for Masonic jurisprudence. There's a separate committee for blah, blah, blah else. Like so each of the things that goes into what would come into our monitors, like
okay.
each of those things, a different committee was like, all right, what do you all do? What do you all do? And they would hash it out until they had agreement, right? And the big push was for the lectures, right? Because in the early 1800s, Americans weren't really lecturing, and then there was misunderstanding about what that meant. Okay, because in England, lecturing simply was like you're teaching about the subject. So,
Mhm.
like, here's a better way of saying it. When we open our monitors now, sometimes it'll have little headings like "the moral advantages of geometry," and then there'll be a paragraph underneath of the. That's there because somebody didn't understand like 18th century cut and paste. What was happening was the masters would say, and then you, as master of the lodge, have to lecture your guys on the moral advantages of geometry. In other words, whatever you
Fill
like,
in the blank, right.
you yes, lecture them on the moral advantages of geometry. And so you can use, Preston, you can use Charles Leslie, you can use Hutchinson, you can use, like, there's all of these Masonic lectures on the moral advantages of geometry. They're all different, but like
Oh my
you,
god.
but what happened was in America, nobody was doing these lectures or knew that you were supposed to be doing it. So our like to steelman them, our brothers were like, hey, we have these lectures that Thomas Smith Webb has narrativized from Prestonian work. Do these, right?
Mm.
In other words, like if you're not doing anything, do these.
So they were
But
like kind of the short talk bulletin,
well, I
pinch
mean, but
hitter.
they're anything but short. Anyone who's ever
Right, right.
memorized one of the,
Right,
they're anything
but
but short. But
to
the idea is that to memorize this, that's a very sort of American Thomas, like
mhm.
that's a. But again, this is all happening, and then about 10 years later, how long is 10 years in Masonry? It's nothing, right? It's a blink. Like 10
Mhm.
years later, we're dealing with the Morgan affair. Then 10 years after that, we're dealing with the anti-Masonic party, and then 10 years after that, we got Baltimore, right? So to me, it's just a dominant. Like, we didn't have a chance. Like, we're just. And so by Baltimore, and then you've got the people who studied with him who are like, Thomas Smith Webb was amazing, and we need to all memorize
Mm.
this. And everyone's like, okay, well, I don't have anything else to memorize, so yeah, let's go. Like, I
So
don't think it was that coy, but you can see the picture I'm sort of painting is it's not necessarily like this was always what we taught. We always said these words. That's not accurate. Like,
right. And
um,
now to your point of trying to like canonize things, it was not so much the confusing part, which I think when I say confusing, I mean that in jest,
right,
like you can still travel around our jurisdictions all across the United States, and the degree conferral is going to be different from
right.
jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The one thing where there might be a lot of similarities now is in that quote unquote second half where you
That's
get the
right.
lectures. Because to your point, like I'm sitting here thinking, okay, how a lodge is situated. If
Hmm.
that was the byline, and I'm thinking of modern masters, worshipful masters I know now, how long or how short that explanation would be, the
Right.
quality of that would vary. Where now you have something that's like, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address
Yes.
right there, and you sound wise beyond the years, and it's fully
Yeah.
explained, and you're like, yep, we all agree this is the thing. So the other thing I find interesting about this is you had mentioned about 20 something grand lodges. They gave themselves 10 days. So who were the powerhouse lodges at that time? If we look at this as like the Americans with the Continental Congress, or when they were drafting the Declaration of Independence, you had, Virginia was a big player. New York kind of a little bit, but I don't know if that would have been the same Masonically speaking with now 20 grand jurisdictions, which I'm
I don't know.
imagining are all up and
You're
down.
doing good so far.
Well, is it was it
Keep going. I bet you got a few more in there too. Like, no, so
is
you're
it like
so
Jersey, North
no,
Carolina,
like, so
South
like
Carolina?
number one. All right. So the number one important people at the convention is Dr. John Dove from Virginia, right? So,
Okay,
and then number two, Charles Whitlock Moore from Massachusetts, right? And
right.
number three, Reverend Albert Case from South Carolina. Number three, John Barney from Ohio. John Barney is really important. We're going to talk about him. Stephen W.B. Carnegie from Missouri. He's another really important figure here.
Hmm.
Joseph Foster from Missouri. And then my personal favorite, we've got Ebenezer Wadsworth from New York.
I love that name. It's a
Ebenezer
very,
Wadsworth.
very classic name there. Okay, so tell us about
Yeah.
John Barney. Why was he such a central figure at that point?
So John Barney is an important guy because John Barney is one of the direct pupils of Webb. So like he studies with the guy. Now his story is interesting. Okay. So when he was young, he had some kind of accident that made him need to walk with a cane. And so like he was a tailor, but sometimes he couldn't make enough money doing that. He ended up making money, literally a career being a traveling Masonic lecturer. Okay. So like
Mm.
this was his gig. He had a good memory and all of this stuff. He wrote a letter to Thomas Smith. I don't know why I typed the letter. He didn't type the letter. He wrote a letter to Thomas Smith Webb, asking to, teach me the work. And Thomas Smith was like, no, but I'll give you my best guy, Benjamin Gleason. And he was like, no, I hear
Hmm.
it from you, or I don't get it. And they were able to work out something that he would do half the work with Benjamin Gleason, and then he would test with Thomas Smith Webb, and Thomas Smith Webb would be like, yeah, you get it right, or you didn't do it right. And that's what happened. So he's like a half child. He's like a
Hmm.
grandchild, if you will, of Thomas Smith Webb. So he's seen as really important in 1843 because he's a direct connection to the source, if you will. Okay. But the reason why he's somewhat problematic's the wrong word. Because he was a traveling lecturer, he learned the lectures wherever he went, like based on how they wanted it. So like if a grandmaster was like, I don't want you talking about that thing that you talked about, and that, like you'd be like, okay, what do you want me to talk
Hmm.
about? I want you to talk about this thing. Okay. And if it was a thing he didn't know, he would learn it, and so on and so forth. So my point is, as he's in all the states that he's in, 'cause I could look it up later, but how do you know like which one was which state? I've got like 3 jurisdictions, and I tell my people every week, I'm like, sometimes I'm just gonna say a word, and like, so when
Cue
you
the
have,
sound of a record being
right,
scratched. Like,
like it's
yeah.
like I so in other words, like I'm the type of Mason that if the line said give a lecture on the moral advantages of geometry, I'll be good because I got things that I could pull from. But if you say, is it trees or timbers? I'm gonna go.
A
Like,
wooden
and that's
product.
but that was so much a part of this convention and the things that were to come after in American
Mm.
ritual. It's so much about, no, it's this word, because
Well,
if it's because, and there's a reason for that, because that's how I tell you're not from here,
gotcha. And
right?
that's the point I wanted to get to is that
It's the such trifling defect proved to them enemies and cost them
yeah,
their lives, right?
yeah.
Like it, but
Well, our
my
listener
keep going.
doesn't have
Tell the ask the question. Keep going.
our listener doesn't have to like imagine very much, especially if you're a Freemason. Just imagine, 10 brothers sitting in a room, and the question is, hey, what are we having for dinner at our next meeting? Cue the crickets, and then no one's going to agree. And then
Right.
eventually someone's going to say, this is it. And the master's going to say, we're going to have this. And then guess what? That's what we have for dinner.
Yeah.
What were some of these debates that were taking place? And keep in mind, these guys had a 10-day timetable to figure this out. So what were the big points of contention?
All right. Key figures, key sources. I don't know. I don't know where you're hopping around to. Sources of debate. Sense of debate. There we are. All right. So the committees. I told you about the committees. Um, Ebenezer Wadsworth,
Your man.
my man from New York, right? This is why you gotta be proud. Okay. Ebenezer
Being
Wadsworth. He's known for being the dissent. He voted no on everything, and he was like, "No, you're changing everything. How dare you change? What are you doing, you idiots?" He's the one guy who votes no on everything. They're all going, "Oh yeah, we all agree." And Ebenezer Wadsworth is like, "You're changing the ritual, and I can't abide it." By day 2, he quits that committee and goes and joins a different one.
nice.
He's my hero,
Yeah. Ebenezer for Grandmaster.
Ebenezer Wadsworth. He's my hero, right? Okay, so the Dew Guards were fixed. So the second and third degree Dew Guards were changed to conform with the first degree Dew Guard. I could explain more to you, but we're in a podcast. They flipped the jewels
Mm.
because, a square, a level, and a plumb are immovable.
Okay.
No, it wasn't really that. It was like, oh, well, what if like we associate them with the offices of the people who wear those jewels? Okay, cool. Like, so that was
Wait.
total.
You're telling me that picture of George Washington standing there with the gavel and the bust and what looks to be the master's collar and jewel, that was photoshopped?
Well, every image of Washington in Masonic regalia, other than the Williams portrait, is a fabrication. But at the
Gotcha.
George Washington Masonic Memorial, there's the only portrait of Washington in Masonic regalia for which he actually posed. So he put all this stuff on and then got painted.
I find this really interesting because I have asked this question so many times, and I'm sure it's what kind of piqued your interest into all of this. Was like, well, hey, what if I traveled back in time? Like, how much of the ritual and masonry would I be familiar
not
with?
A lot. No, you wouldn't recognize a lot.
I mean, all I have to do is go back to 1840, and I'd walk into a lodge and be like, "Hey, the master doesn't have his jewel on. Like, we can't even open the meeting
no,
with
it's
it."
not. That's not what I mean. I mean they changed. So from the immovable jewels being the ashlars, like
Mhm.
an actual giant rock that you can't move because it's a giant rock, and
Right.
instead we're going to have it be this tiny thing that clearly can move. I mean, like we renamed those jewels to be immovable or
Oh, so
movable.
they made something make sense then. Wow, that's a
No, they
first.
make the opposite of sense.
Oh, then that also makes sense because that's Freemasonry. Yeah, that totally
Yeah,
makes
no,
sense now.
it has to make the opposite of sense, and it still confuses our UK brethren because they never flipped it. So
Of
the
course.
square, the level, and the plumb are the movable jewels over there,
Right.
and the rough ashlar, perfect ashlar, and trestle board are the immovable. I mean, pardon me, are the immovable jewels. Right? See, I'm making myself go cross-eyed, but
And we're driving on the wrong side of the road still.
that's
So
right.
there we
Right.
go.
So, so that was a thing. They started. They had debate over what degree we should do business on, because prior to this meeting, business was always done on the EA degree, and you would call up to do things. So that way, everybody can be in. Similar to how you guys do it in Washington D.C. It's all like any business can be done in the first degree. At the Baltimore Convention, they, especially with the push of Missouri, it was like, nope, Master Masons only. Like, and that was a huge push. So any jurisdictions that still do business only on the Master Mason degree, it's because of this. It comes directly from the Baltimore Convention. Another thing they changed was the blazing star, the explanation of that symbol,
Okay.
but it was because America had changed it, so they really were going back. In the early 1800s, especially Jeremy Ladd Cross, they really were tying the blazing star to the Star of Bethlehem. It was supposed to be heralding the birth of the Savior, and there's a huge push for uh, what they were called primitive Christianity in the early Masonry, and so that symbol got associated with Bethlehem. But when you read the Finch lectures and stuff from England, that's not part of that symbol. So this was kind of like a move back.
Mm.
And it was for the purpose of universality of religion, so that because it was intended originally to be the glory, to be a symbol of the glory of God, like it's a divine glory, and rather than an actual celestial body.
Mm.
Right. Okay. What else did they do? They tried to create the Grand Lodge of the United States. So this was actually the answer to your question that you had earlier.
Ooh,
Which
this
was
is the
like,
big
who
one. They
gives them
tried. Yeah.
the authority? Well, they
The
tried. They were
grand
like, yeah,
authority.
they
Yeah.
wanted to be like, all right, let's save this and we'll make. But if you know anything about American history at that time, states' rights and that wasn't really ever going to fly, and so that ultimately did fail. But what they decided to do was, let's do this again every 3 years and keep it going and make sure that we keep keep being kosher.
How long did that
So
last?
it didn't even last like 2 years. So the next year, like
Shocker.
only the next year, like 8 people showed up. The year after that, like
Yeah.
6, and basically
Yeah.
it was because the Grand Lodges were like, no, you're not, we're not interested.
Well, the
So
thing that is the strength of Freemasonry also became the weakness of Freemasonry, which is each state or commonwealth or whatever you want to call where you live,
mhm.
each jurisdiction has its own governance power as long as they're in amity with each other. So to say, hey, we're going to have, I can honestly see why people are like, it would not work here. Could you imagine just if we were still living in the 1840s, seriously, with 20 grand lodges, how are you going to select a grand master out of 20 states? If you, as a delegate, don't even know who this person is, it becomes the supreme popularity contest.
It already is that. Let's be honest. Come on.
But now imagine today if you had 52, 53 American close by grand, it would be the biggest states would win, and it would be crazy.
Sure.
And it would be also more expensive to be a Mason because you'd have your Grand Lodge of your state dues, and then you'd probably also have to pay for the Grand Lodge, which would be
Well, the real scary thing is like anytime anytime you try to go from grassroots to top down, everything gets lost, right? What I say? Cracks are how the light gets in. It's supposed to be broken. It's supposed to be ugly.
yeah.
It's supposed to, as soon as you try to create it into a utopia, as soon as you show me heaven, I'll show you why it's my hell. Like you can't create a utopia without creating somebody else's dystopia. Like it just can't happen. So this is why, Harmony in the Hive, it's about everybody. Y'all got to do
Right.
your thing. So yeah, how does to tie that back to your question? Because I feel like
Well,
I missed.
I was kind of curious, like, so you outlined some of the things that they talked about. These are points of contention. Obviously, one of the big losers, but really was, hey, we're not going to have a grand lodge of the north of the United States
Right.
of America. So I'm curious, like, what one that was kind of a big thing, and how long did they spend talking about? Was the idea of a grand lodge like, no, after 2 days, no, we're not gonna do that. But this
Oh, I don't.
idea of
I
movable and immovable,
I don't know the length of
Mm.
discussions. So
That's the stuff
I
you
just
wish you
know
could
the
travel back in the time machine for, I bet, though.
well, I'm sure the proceedings exist somewhere, but I don't feel like traveling to wherever didn't digitize whatever
Gotcha.
because it's a better example. I asked a friend of mine if he had a version of Anderson's 1723 constitutions that had been OCR, optical character recognition, like good, wasn't full of artifacts that like from the sevens are really T's, and so like that wasn't awful. And he
Mm,
he looked right at me and he went, no, who cares other than us? And that was
very
the most
true.
honest thing that anyone has ever said ever, right? So like I'm sure there are proceedings that I could look at, but yeah, I didn't.
Mm. All right.
Because for the purpose of this podcast, I, I
Well,
know enough
you're
about.
still one of my
Yeah.
favorite Masonic historians
I
and
I have to push
worshipables.
back on this while we're live. I cannot claim that title, and there are many who would be upset that would even my name would even come up in the conversation of Masonic historian. So I will accept Masonic author, but I'm going to have to push back so that way I don't get angry emails from
I'm sure there's some
from
lodge that could appoint you to
from
that, and
people
yeah,
who
I
yeah.
gotcha.
So I'm
All right.
gonna I'm
Well,
I'll,
either way,
I'll just be pedantic.
you laid out for those of us that don't have the time machine or even the
Mm.
attention span to open a book and do this thing called reading it. You've laid out wonderfully and explained a lot of what this convention was and kind of the spirit of it, who the people were, what they were talking about, the things that worked and the things that didn't work. Overall, regardless of the fact that they didn't meet in full force for the next 2 terms or sessions or whatever, what was your take on it? Did you think it was a successful endeavor in
Well,
Baltimore?
I'm glad you re brought up the fact that they didn't meet, because like I was being coy. They morphed it. It still exists now. It's called the North American Conference of Grandmasters. They just did it in South Carolina this year. Like they all the grandmasters get together, and that is a direct descendant of the Baltimore
Okay.
Convention. So
The
I was
spirit of it
being
exists.
funny, right? I was
Right.
just being like, yeah, well, in true Masonic fashion, we get this great idea and then we don't do anything else with it, right? But the idea behind the fact that all the grandmasters in North America still get together uh, once a year is a direct descendant of that.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, did for what it was trying to accomplish or what it was set out to do in 1843, do you say success, not a success?
So
How do you rate it?
is this the question of the single most important long term or or is it a success? See, this is hard. All right, because the Baltimore Convention to me is the birth of bureaucracy. All of the bloat, the blob, everything that stinks about 2025 Freemasonry was born in Baltimore with dues cards and dropped for non-payment and all the bureaucracy of how to just be a Freemason the right way. Like,
Mm,
and then we're all going to go home. And because we couldn't agree all together, I'm going to go home and be a tyrant back home. That's like kind of what they do is like, I can't be a national tyrant, so I'll just be a tyrant here. Where like historically, Masonry was a lodge level thing. The lodges were doing different rituals. The lodges were doing different ceremonies. The lodges were doing things. And then the lodges made up a Grand Lodge. The
mm,
Grand Lodge didn't top down say, here's what you got to do and what have you. So, but to steelman this, okay, the Baltimore conventions standardized the administrative rails, okay, that made the mass growth of the 19th and 20th century possible. Without the Baltimore Convention, Freemasonry is very fragmented, and I don't know how much it survives post Morgan affair. But it creates this very rigid framework that kind of calcifies over time,
mm,
and then entrenches these managerial class, rather than like, and that becomes like the standard, is this idea that, oh, the grandmaster said, like, oh, okay, cool, like, but like so I see it as the birth of bureaucracy, and
okay.
I don't think that was a bad thing at the time, because it helped us survive. But now we're in a huge decline, and nobody wants a meeting for the sake of meeting, or a meeting about the meeting, or a meeting about how we can have more meetings. And like, and we've this sort of, I feel like
Mm.
we're drowning in the blob of, yeah, but the digest says this, the digest says that. Well, the digest is completing different conflicting things in two different spots, and it hasn't been updated since 1980 whatever, and we're still doing $50 per capita, even though that was set up in 1885, and it really should be 1,500 bucks. I don't know. Like we're drowning in this bureaucracy instead of
Mm.
remembering that we used to do this with three candles and a piece of chalk to all play pretend together about how we can be better men by thinking about how old people, pardon me, by thinking about the ancients and how they were better men,
Yeah.
like that. So it's a very simple thing that we make very complicated, and I see that as an outskirt of
Yeah.
Baltimore.
Well, for a fraternity that's set on, ancient values of like respect and trust and tradition, these are all things that carry for us. Like, I feel the same way. And I think anybody that's visited our nation's capital and gone in and taken a Capitol tour and looked
Hmm.
up and been like so inspired and been like, yes, America, democracy is great.
Right,
And all these things, like, we need to fight for this and we need to keep advancing that. And then you turn on your news and you get home and you see these two sides fighting over red blue issues over stupid
right,
things that you're like, what the founding fathers would be so embarrassed. You
yeah,
I feel the same way when I go to my Grand Lodge session in New York in May and I get to go into our wonderful Grand Lodge building and go upstairs into the big room with the old chairs and the smell and the pipe organ and the stained glass ceilings and all the portraits of the Grand Masters, and I get to sit in these incredibly small chairs because people were much smaller back then than they are now as our full-size bars get in there.
yeah,
And I sit there and I think, wow, the wonderful things, the meaningful things that these guys discuss. And I'm like, you know what? It was pretty much the same stuff that we're
same.
still talking about today.
Hmm. It was. Yeah, I say that all the time. What was it like? It's exactly like it
Mm.
was now.
It's just really hot because there was no air
Somebody like
conditioning.
the guy next to me, he ate beans and he was just farting the whole time,
Yeah.
and I was trying to hold it together, and then finally, the gavel whacked, and we were able to get out of there. Like it men are men.
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
that's the takeaway I have.
But I think the thing for me, to your point about this, is we kind of like look through it, and then we're not trying to do
No,
revisionist history here. We're just looking back through that lens of time and going, yeah, but that is kind of cool to think like, you know, brothers from 20 something different jurisdictions, they got together for 10 days. They talked about things to the point where one guy was like, yeah, no, I don't want to be on that committee anymore. I'm going to switch over here because, nah, I don't want to be a part. That they talked about something that we're still passionate about today. And some of these differences, they are much bigger now with with a lot of the social issues, honestly, that's kind of tearing our country apart and has gotten into the craft. That's for another time. But to know that these guys at one time and place got together and have finally said, hey, we need to save Freemasonry after this national disaster that happened that almost put us out of business, to be honest. And let's try to get together and talk. And we'll start by talking about the ritual, start by talking about the symbols. We're going to try to level set everything here. And I like that we had that conversation.
oh sure, yeah. Um, what's what's very interesting is how many American Grand Lodges were created after this
Hmm.
convention. Like
Yeah.
it's
The
a
whole West Coast
so
was still
yeah the
undiscovered, basically.
the so like when this whole conversation you and I started, it was like the question was like, oh, I want how much did this affect? And it's like, well, it depends. How old's your Grand Lodge?
Mm,
Because coming from Grand Lodge of DC and then going to a lodge that's much younger, right? I see, oh, this makes sense. Like there's a lot more Baltimore work in Florida. Like it's almost all like Baltimore Convention stuff because Grand Lodge was created in 1830, and then 13 years later they go and they get the ritual. So of course, like it's a no-brainer. If you're a brand new Grand Lodge and somebody says, hey, we just here's all the ceremonies and here's all the work, thank you.
hmm.
I accept this gratefully, and like yeah, it makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, and as we talk about Preston Webb, I always think of it as like Lennon McCartney or McCartney Lennon, and that's kind of how it was in New York State, where it was more Webb Preston because Webb was from New York and had a little bit more of a kind of an influence. And as you talked about our friend Ebenezer and them not voting because they wanted to keep their ritual, which was some of the takeaway that some of these jurisdictions were like, no, we don't want to change our traditions. We like practicing our Freemasonry our way.
Right. Well, some of it's a little complicated too. Like, so a great example is Vermont. Vermont got hammered after the Morgan affair, right? Like, basically, Masonry didn't exist. Like, there's famous stories about, we put a candle in the window hoping somebody would show up, and
Mm,
like that sort of thing. But they were largely unaffected by the Baltimore Convention because they had John Barney. So they had the John Barney lectures. So they basically were like, yeah, we're good. We don't need, because we have it already.
right. We just need to get
So
guys
yeah,
back in the lodge,
yeah,
basically.
like we just so I mean, that's why it's hard to make any sort of blanket, statements. Louisiana wanted nothing to do with it because Louisiana was basically doing French work. So
Mm,
Louisiana was like,
right.
good,
Yeah.
we're good. Like, there were a few others and then of the ones that did it, so Missouri was there. Missouri comes back, and in grand session they go, yeah, we're not gonna we're gonna accept the ciphered portions, but not the monitor. They were there. They
Wait,
come
wait,
back, and
wait,
the Grand
wait,
Lodge
wait. Hold
is
on.
like, yeah, like this is like it's
How are
so
they going to? They're
so
going to go mouth to ear like
Well,
this
so
is
this is what yeah. So when they come back and they do the two guys from Missouri go back and they exemplify the catechetical work in grand session, and they were like, okay, cool, like we
is that
accept
why they're
this.
called the
But then
Show Me State? Seriously, come on.
I couldn't speak to that, but but I mean, I think that's so interesting. But again, it goes back to sort of, politics is the wrong word, but around that same time,
Mm,
Jeremy Ladd Cross has a new edition of the hieroglyphic chart that just came out, and so Missouri's like, all right, we're going to make this our monitor, right? So uh, it's it's just that's a hard, it's a tough time to track down things
right.
in masonry, because everyone's basically doing mouth to ear stuff and then buying monitors that somebody made. And a
Yeah.
lot of it is, I'm just going to make up a new introduction to this lecture, right? Because the lecture starts, the lecture's been the same for a very long time, and I'm not going to change it. But you know what I can change? I can change the beginning 3 pages, where I start with, the first or entered apprentice degree of Freemasonry is intended symbolically to represent the unregenerate man, and it's like,
Mm,
so that's nothing. That's but Grand Lodges would be like, memorize the 3 pages, and
mm,
but that comes from Baltimore. I realized, like, that's a prevented that's a safety measure, because I can get the I can get Allen's ritual, I can get Morgan, I can get whatever, and I can
r-
memorize the lecture stuff, but the preamble,
mm,
I'm not going to have that. So it's
right.
a so it's a it, it's- so it's funny, because like the thing I hate the most about our lectures was put in there as a safety measure, to so that way, if you're not giving me the 2 pages of stuff before the actual content, you didn't learn our work.
Right.
That makes sense. I don't know how New York is, but typically, like, in jurisdictions, there will be a sort of like an introduction to the lecture before the lecture. Like, you're about to hear a lecture in 3 sections, like,
We
and
have
so
that. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
like that's that's
Yeah.
so- that's a
Well,
thing that gets added to like I said, to it's a way of finding us versus them.
mm. We don't do enough, and I'm hoping in this new season we do more uh, episodes on the history of Freemasonry, the actual part of American Freemasonry and the birth of it and it growing, because I think it's important for our listener to understand, like, when you think about 1843, where the country was, you touched on it. Like, we
Hmm.
only had 20 grand lodges or
Yeah,
grand jurisdictions that participated in this. The country was expanding. We had just come out of the Morgan affair. We were always divided, but Freemasonry was really just recovering from the big black
yeah,
eye, the knockout blow that it almost
absolutely.
had.
Yeah,
Here we are
and
in
came back better
2020.
than ever, right? And built back better, right? Like, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
it's super
yeah,
strong. So
yeah.
why is it important now in 2026 for a modern Mason to understand this history and to go, oh, wait, I thought Baltimore was just famous for once being the home of the Baltimore Colts. Like, oh, there was this
Right.
convention of Masons that happened here. Why is this important for them to know?
So it's important for a couple of reasons. First is that these conventions like this, I should say, still happen. Like the Masonic Restoration Foundation still has get-togethers. They were in Canada recently, and various Masonic cons that are tri-state and sort of thing. There's tri-county degrees. There's like things are happening that Masons get together. It's just probably not to the extent that we're trying to save Masonry as they were, back then, right? So that's the one thing. But the other thing is, when you those of us who join Masonry because of like National Treasure movies, we
Hmm.
want the I want the hidden knowledge, right? And I want to feel like I'm perpetuating a thing that people used to know, and I'm the reason you still know it. It's because of
Hmm.
me, right? In this dark room with a candle, like, and to the extent that we do that, like we're being awesome. To the extent that we're like, well, you didn't say the exact word that I wanted you to say, and it was the and like like that is a thing that's a consequence of things like Baltimore, things
Mm.
like this sort of canonization, right? As opposed to lecture me on the moral advantages of geometry.
Right.
uh, now, the reason I point that out is because it's I originally I was thinking of this was like the Bretton Woods convention in New Hampshire in 1947, where we get the gold standard, and then in the 70s they get rid of it. Like I was like, oh, this is like that, but it's not, because you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. This is
Mm.
a better example would be like, say, like the Patriot Act or something, right? Like, we do a thing in response to a direct crisis that happened to us that we need to do because uh, that time. Well, it's not that time anymore. So do
Mm.
we still need to be doing
Right.
the thing that so I think that's the lesson that we should take from Baltimore, is that some of the things that the grumpy old guy in the corner is going to tell you we've done forever, we haven't done forever, and there is another way that we could do it.
Mm.
Like it doesn't have to be, the
Right.
bureaucracy doesn't have to win. I guess
So
is
I know we didn't prepare for this question, but I was
sure.
just curious to get your thoughts on it. So when I was just and I'll say this, when I was just your ignorant, newly raised sublime master mason, and got to travel to another jurisdiction, my
Hmm.
mother lodge in Schenectady, St. George's number 6. We have a sister lodge down in St. Francisville, Louisiana, that every summer they travel down for the Civil War reenactment on the day that the war stopped and participate in that. We do a lot of events and barbecues. Yeah, it's awesome. And I remember being there during a crawfish boil, and
Yeah.
they had an EA, and we're sitting there at the dinner table, and I'm trying to work with him on his catechism, and I start the first line that we use in New York, "Whence came you?" And I wait for him to reply, and he's like, "There's usually something else you're supposed to say before that." And I'm like, "No, no, I'm not. I just did this like." And then I get an elbow into the ribs, and I'm like, what? And it's one of my brothers, and he's like, they don't practice the same ritual that we practice here. And I was like, there's different ritual. So that was me, and now I understand a part of it. Now living in another jurisdiction and practicing masonry here in the nation's capital, I kind of like that there's some differences. And I've been to
Right.
Maryland. When
But
did you first realize that the ritual that you learned was not, and there's not just one gospel ritual that rules all rituals, and it's different? And how do you feel about that?
I knew that pretty early. But I'm also curious. So like when I see something in the ritual, especially in like DC, there's weird things in DC that don't exist other places. So when I would read that, I'd be like, "That's weird. Why is that there?" And then I'd always get the question like, or I'd get the response like, "I don't know." Like there was just this like lack of interaction, like lack of curiosity, right?
Hmm.
And then I thought, oh, okay, well, that's just the way that is. And then I come down to Florida, and like things are completely different. I go, oh, that's weird. Why is that way? And they look at me and go, I don't know. Like, there's just so I find out why the things are the way they are, and then that satisfies my curiosity, right? Like,
Mm.
I guess ultimately, I think it comes down to, I love the pasta sauce my grandma used to make, and I'm sure you love the pasta sauce your grandma used to make, and I'm sure they're very different pasta sauces. And if I
Mm.
tried to give you my grandma's pasta sauce and you tried to give me yours, it wouldn't be right, right?
Mm.
Because the answer isn't pasta sauce. The answer is pasta sauces, right? And so the answer isn't Freemasonry. The answer is Freemasonries. And so I think So like this is sort of to your point of earlier when you were like the antidote can become the poison. The thing that we did after Baltimore was we're gonna hunker down on the each sovereign grand lodge is gonna be their thing, right? Well,
Mm,
we're now in a situation where we're not benefiting from the fact that a large geographic area has a lot of lodges that basically all look the same. They all do the same work, they all have the same essential building, the same properties, the same, so there's no major differences between why should I go to Lodge B versus Lodge C, other than the time that I visited Lodge B, they were talking about political stuff that I didn't want to talk about dinner. I'm going based on Reddit. Like
hmm
these are legitimate concerns that come out all the time. Like, oh, just go find a different lodge. That's always the answer. Go find a different lodge. Well, that's
hmm
great if the different lodge is actually a different lodge, but largely speaking, in the United States, lodges just look like every other lodge. They're just, oh, but this one's in this town. This
mm,
one's near this location. This one's
right.
over here. So I
I
think
gotta
the
say,
keep going.
I love that sauce analogy because it really hits it. Like
Yeah,
my grandmother never made spaghetti sauce. She's Mexican. She made enchilada
there you
sauce.
go.
So
So
to your
but it's
point,
still
like
sauce. Like
it's still sauce,
yeah,
and I think that's what makes it kind of cool that we live in this big country. We're brothers. We're across jurisdictions. We're
right.
still connected. And I like the fact I go to one jurisdiction and their worshipful master wears an apron with purple ribbon. And to me, I'm like, oh, that must be a right worshipful because purple is the color of the Grand Lodge. Like, nope, that's what the worshipful master wears here. It's like,
That's right.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So like that's a great that's a great point, right? So purple is worn by most Grand Lodges, and it is not worn by DC. They don't
Mm,
wear purple; they wear white. And so so the whole I went to a table lodge once and we were toasting the purple and the gold, and I was like, I don't know what that means, but it was like, okay, cool. Like, so,
but I'm here for it.
right,
Woo!
exactly, like, yeah, exactly, right. That's it. Each when in Rome, do as the Romans do is fine, but I would like if each place had. I don't mean to sound like I want everywhere to be like DC, but you can't harp on the fact enough that there are 35 lodges that do one work, and then there's 12 other lodges in the city that you can go see: Farsi, Italian, German,
hmm
French. I'm going to see the Scottish work. I'll see the emulation work. I'll see the McBride ritual. I'll see the like. There's pasta sauces. There's enchilada sauces, and
Yeah.
and you don't have to travel to France to see French. I don't
Yeah.
speak French, so I'm not going to do that. But like, the idea is to the extent that Grand Lodges can embrace, I don't know, sauces.
Yeah.
I
Y-
think
You know
that's
who the person I feel the worst for in all of that is the grand lecturers of those jurisdictions that have the multiple
no.
tongues that they have to learn to
It was
speak.
awesome because I was assistant grand lecturer in DC, and I was tasked to do and to go to La France. They do Scottish rite work in French, and
Mm-hmm.
I said
But I don't speak
I don't
French.
speak. I said I don't speak French, and I don't know Scottish rite work. And the grand lecturer was like, "You'll know," and he wasn't wrong.
You'll know.
Yeah, but he wasn't wrong. Like I sat there and I was like, they know what they're doing. Like it was, you'll know. Like you
You'll know.
know, but you do. He wasn't wrong.
Love it.
It also helps that that lodge was made up of a lot of Grand Lodge members, right? But that's not the. Ultimately, he's like, you'll know, and he wasn't wrong. Yes, you yeah.
So I've got two questions for you.
Super groovy.
Well, actually, one, and then the
And
fun
then a
one we'll
follow up.
save
Okay.
for later. Yeah. So again, his book is Harmony in the Hive. He
Mm,
is the author of it, worshipful brother Nathan St. Pierre.
yes.
For the listener brother who has an interest, who's enjoyed this conversation on the Baltimore Convention and is like, hey, I want to dive into that thing called a book or an article or something else I can read to really kind of get into this and understand the evolution of American ritual. Where would you point them, Nathan?
Well, now that we've got awesome things like digitized PDFs, you can read the books that they published after the convention. Yay!
Not as exciting as a toast at a festival.
Oh, it's actually more exciting. We didn't get to this part. We didn't get to the drama of the fallout.
Mm.
Of
What happened?
So the guy from Massachusetts, he's in charge of writing the book with the help of the guy from Missouri. So the two of them are working. They get the book, and then the guy from Virginia was supposed to sign off on the book and say like, yeah, we're good. And then he gets the book, and they had added like 2 charges that they didn't talk about at the convention.
Uh-oh.
And he like freaked out and was like, I cannot sign this. You have you've changed it and done all these things. Later in my notes I have the actual quote, but I'm not gonna look for it right now. But he really freaks out that he's like, nope, not signing off. Then he decides like a few years later he publishes his own called the Masonic Textbook. And then that becomes the one that they do in Virginia. And then Virginia does this big thing where like they denounce the Baltimore work, but they adopt John Dove's work. John Dove was at Baltimore, so it's like
Masons
saying,
being
like,
Masons, man.
no, it's like I can't stand the New York Giants. I love Eli Manning. Like it's like it's like I don't know. Like it's like okay, whatever. Like you're good. Okay. Like so there's that split. So they have that whole fight over whether Virginia or Massachusetts is right. And then, like I said, out in Missouri, they're like, but we just got Jeremy Ladd Cross's book. We're going to use that one instead. So they do that. So we have all these books that are all supposed to be the Baltimore work.
Yeah.
And then,
what a mess.
Oh, it was such a mess. But the Masonic Trestle Board is available, the PDF. The Virginia textbook, John Dove, that's available PDF. I was going to do a super flex, and I was going to hold up hard copies of both, but I would have been disingenuous because I would have been taking them from my lodge library and lying and being like, "Oh, look, I have these right here." but I don't. But now,
well,
that
you've read them is a bigger flex. I think that you've read them is the biggest flex. That's impressive.
For contemporary, this is the Mason's Words. I'm probably backwards on your screen, but the Mason's Words by Bob Davis, 33rd degree Grand Cross. That's one of the best books on the history of American ritual that's been done, and the way he writes is like talking to him. It's great. Another good book about American Freemasonry, but not about Baltimore, is American Freemasons, Mark Tabbert. That's a very good one from 2006. And then David Hackett was a professor at University of Florida. He wrote a book called That Religion in Which All Men Agree, and it is the history of Freemasonry in American culture. And that came out in 2015. That's another fantastic one. So
nice.
That's the real answer to. I was being funny when I said you should read old stuff. I mean, you should read old stuff, but.
Yeah, no, and I like that they're kind of relatively new. All right, here comes the fun question, but don't make me regret that I asked you this, because our audience loves their extra time with Worshipful Brother Nathan St. Pierre, and we don't want to deprive them of it. Yeah, extra time. What was the one thing that I didn't ask you that you were like, RC, I've got to talk about this. Give me a good solid 5 minutes. Go.
No. I think we did. I think we hit on everything.
No way. I don't believe you.
I mean, we may have hit.
There we go. Because my favorite, I asked
there's
you
always
this,
something. There's always
dude.
something, right?
I get a text message and you're like, "We forgot to talk about this," and I'm like,
"There's always something, right?" So, do you know what we didn't talk about? You asked me. Okay, you asked me what's an actual piece of work that we do that we can say like this comes from Baltimore, like what's an actual thing, and you're not gonna like it. So I know you like to stand, but maybe you should sit down.
Is it going to be more than 5 minutes?
No.
Okay.
Great architect of the universe, in thy name we have assembled, and in thy name we desire to proceed in all our doings. Grant that the surprise, the prayer.
That is what came from the.
Yes. Yeah, the prayer that's old. Like, it's an adaptation of an old prayer. But it was written in 1843.
Was it originally a Masonic prayer, or was it like when you talk about songs in the past? Where they
Yeah, no. So there's a Masonic prayer from the 1740s. no, pardon me, 1730s, that is very close to the prayer that we use at initiation,
Mm.
with a few added differences. Is when 2 or 3 are gathered in thy name, you will be in the midst of them, and so on and so forth. But the we desire to proceed in all our doings. That's a quote, like a paraphrase of this guy William Smith from 1783, who was like a personal enemy of Ben Franklin and a friend of Washington, and he did this. He had a prayer that starts that way for the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
And so it's like they're basically like taking a bunch of different prayers rather, and they put them together, and then and now we always have to open lodge with the same prayer because of 1843, right? So that's one. The other one is opening charge. The ways of virtue are beautiful. Knowledge is attained by degrees. Wisdom dwells with contemplation. Therefore, let us seek it. That was written in that's a bad retread of a Charles Leslie lecture from the 1740s and mixed in with some Prestonian things from the 1770s. But it is a 1843 creation.
Interesting.
Another thing they did was they added a symbol to the trestle board, but I can't go into that because it's somewhat esoteric.
Secret.
Well, not really, but like if I would explain it, you'd go, huh? And then it would take an extra 10 minutes and it wouldn't, it's not even important. But they added a symbol to the trestle board, the chart, the images.
So I think this
There
is
we
going
are.
to fall into the things that's unimportant completely off of any prep conversation that we would have had before. And it is the ultimate circle back to your original episode that you did with me, which was on Masonic songs and how they were taking parts of things that were popular and
Right.
rehashing them. See, I was paying attention.
Yeah.
I listened.
That's it.
What is your hot take on Taylor Swift's new album and the controversy now that she's been taking other parts of other people's songs? And
Oh, I haven't listened to it.
Oh,
but, my take on Taylor Swift is for a different podcast on music that Nathan would do. But Taylor Swift has staying power, and that is good. When you write as much music as she does, it's not all going to be good. Similar to Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, like they just write a ton of songs.
Yeah.
And then like it's the Andy Warhol, right? Like make art, and then while people are talking about whether it's good or not, make more art. Like,
Yep.
And then let them. So I'll leave the Taylor Swift thing there, but more to your point is the taking things and putting them together. That's as Masonic as anything, right? So there's a lecture that they do here, part of the EA degree, that made my brain go, where the heck is that from? And then because I went looking and I found it's a direct quote from a 1774 science textbook where the guy is quoting Pliny the Elder. So it's a quote of a quote from and now it's part of the EA lecture in Florida. That type of stuff. I'm like, that's great. I love that stuff. Like,
I made the mistake of asking.
So, but the songs thing, right? We should be writing songs. I got friends in Vermont that write lodge songs and sing it about their lodge, like not just about, hey, Masons is great, but like about our guys, about our stuff, about our things. And if you were to do it the way the Masons of old did, it would be theater songs. So we should be doing it to
Broadway shows.
Hamilton, right? Exactly. Yes, we should be doing, guns and ships and guns or whatever, and or so, there was a friend in Vermont asked me about a specific Mason song, and I was like, "Oh, do you mean this?" And I knew the exact one. And he was like, "You're the only one in the world that knows this stuff." And I was like, "Well, this is basically the 18th century equivalent of shipping up to Boston." And he's like, "Now you're talking my language, right? Dropkick Murphys, right?" So, Michael, you need to go write a Masonic song to the tune of Dropkick Murphys, Boston, and I need to hear that. I need that in my life.
I'm gonna go have a few drinks, and I'll come
back.
And
then you get on that. You get right on that.
Right on it. For now, though, I'm gonna let you go.
I've enjoyed this so much.
I'm already thinking about future episodes every time I talk with you.
All right, what do you want to know about so I can start reading?
Thank you so much for your time tonight, sir.
I appreciate you. Thanks again.